Welcome back to Code Your English, the channel where language meets life, and where we go beyond vocabulary lists and grammar drills to explore the deeper conversations that shape how we speak and how we live. Let me ask you something. When did we start believing that life is supposed to be easy? That if we're struggling, something must be wrong? Somewhere along the line, many of us picked up this silent expectation that life should flow effortlessly, like a well-oiled machine. And when it doesn't, when it breaks down or takes an unexpected turn, we feel like we've failed, or worse, that we're falling behind. But what if the truth is simpler and stranger? What if life isn't meant to be easy? What if the real design, the deeper purpose, is to stretch us, challenge us, and in doing so, shape who we become? Now, I know that might sound a little heavy, maybe even a bit unfair, but take a moment to think about it. When was the last time you grew, really grew, during a period when everything was smooth sailing? Probably not recently. Most of our growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from friction, from difficulty, from moments when we're forced to rise to the occasion. That's why I want to start this episode with a quiet truth. Life is no walk in the park. And maybe, just maybe, it's not supposed to be. Because it's not about avoiding pain, but navigating through it. It's not about making life easier. It's about becoming stronger. And becoming stronger doesn't mean becoming hard or cold or emotionless. No, it means becoming resilient, more grounded, less shaken by the inevitable storms that come our way. And storms do come. They always have, and they always will. The trick, if there is one, is not to resist life's challenges, but to learn how to work with them. To understand that challenges aren't interruptions to our path. They are part of the path. In fact, they shape the path. They reveal parts of us we didn't know existed, strengths we hadn't yet discovered, perspectives we hadn't considered. Think about the stories we love, whether it's ancient mythology, modern films, or the quiet conversations we have with someone we trust. Almost always, the hero, the central figure, goes through some kind of test. Something hard, something painful. And that trial becomes the very thing that transforms them. We never admire characters who had it easy. We admire the ones who found their way through the difficulty and came out the other side changed. So here's something to reflect on. Are you spending your energy trying to make life easier? Or trying to make yourself stronger? And deeper still, what do you believe struggle says about you? Is it shameful? Or is it necessary? These aren't just questions for self-help books. They're questions for real life. Because every day, we're faced with moments that test our patience, our courage, and our clarity. The challenge is not to avoid those tests, but to recognize them as the very process of becoming. Over the next few segments, we'll explore what it really means to get stronger, not in a superficial, motivational way, but in a deep, sustainable, and human way. We'll talk about emotional stamina, resilience, limiting beliefs, and how you can start rewriting the internal scripts that keep you stuck. But for now, take a breath. Let this idea sit with you. Life isn't supposed to be easy. It's meant to test us. And through those tests, we grow. And that's not a flaw in the system. That's the point of the system. What does getting stronger actually mean? So, what does it really mean to get stronger? We hear that phrase so often, in podcasts, in self-help books, in social media captions pasted over images of mountain peaks or marathon runners, that it almost loses its weight. But here on Code Your English, we like to slow things down and ask, what are we actually talking about when we talk about strength? Let's be honest. For many people, the word strength immediately brings to mind something physical. Muscles, stamina, endurance. And that makes sense. It's where our earliest associations start. Strong arms, strong backs, athletes pushing themselves to the limit. But strength, real, lasting strength, is much bigger than that. It's not just about physical capacity. It's about emotional resilience, mental flexibility, and the ability to stay centered even when life feels completely off balance. Think about it. Physical strength is visible, measurable. You can count the weight someone lifts, the distance they run, the speed they move. But emotional and mental strength? Those are invisible. There are no medals for navigating a panic attack in silence. No trophies for waking up every day while carrying a quiet grief. And yet, that kind of strength may be even harder to build, and far more essential to the way we live. Here's the thing. Getting stronger doesn't mean becoming untouchable. It doesn't mean you stop feeling pain or stress or fear. In fact, if you stop feeling those things entirely, that might not be strength at all. That might be numbness or avoidance. True strength isn't about being unaffected. It's about being able to feel deeply and still move forward, still make thoughtful decisions, still hold on to your values. You see, strength isn't the absence of struggle. It's the ability to stay present through it. And that takes a special kind of energy, a kind of emotional stamina. If you've ever had to manage your emotions in a tough conversation, stay calm in the middle of chaos, or hold space for someone else's pain while carrying your own, you know what I mean? That's not weakness. That's power. Quiet, internal power. And like any other kind of strength, this too is built over time, through effort, through repetition. Think of it like training a muscle you didn't even know you had. Every time you sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, you're strengthening that part of yourself. Every time you respond with curiosity instead of anger or compassion instead of judgment, you're reinforcing those emotional muscles. And the next time, it gets a little easier. Not because the situation is easier, but because you've changed. Now, let's talk about another side of this idea. Adaptability. A lot of people confuse strength with rigidity, with being tough, hard, unshakable. But in reality, some of the strongest people are the most flexible. They know when to bend, when to shift, when to let go. Strength isn't always about holding on at any cost. Sometimes it's knowing when to release, when to pivot, when to say, this isn't working anymore, and that's okay. This ability to adapt, to shift your mindset, adjust your expectations, or completely reimagine a situation, is one of the most underrated forms of strength. We call this cognitive flexibility, the capacity to see things from different angles, to stay open to new information, to rethink your conclusions when necessary. And in today's world, where change is constant and certainty is rare, this kind of flexibility might be one of the most valuable strengths we can develop. But here's something important. None of this happens by accident. Becoming stronger, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, requires intentional effort. And just like in the gym, progress doesn't happen overnight. You may not notice the change day by day, but over time, if you stay with the process, you'll look back and realize you're responding differently. You're not as reactive. You're more grounded. You're recovering faster from setbacks that would have crushed you before. That's what growth feels like from the inside. Quiet, subtle, but absolutely real. So maybe the better question isn't, how strong are you? But, what does your version of strength look like? Today, in this season of your life? Because strength isn't a fixed identity. It's not something you're born with or without. It's a practice, a process, and sometimes it's loud and brave and visible. And sometimes it's silent and soft and unnoticed. But both kinds matter. Let's pause here for a moment. Let me ask you, when you hear the word resilience, what images come to mind? Is it someone climbing out of a crisis? Someone rebuilding after failure? Someone showing up even when they're scared? All of those things are acts of resilience. And resilience doesn't mean you never fall apart. It means you come back together again, even stronger, even wiser. So next time you catch yourself thinking, I should be stronger by now, try flipping the script. Ask instead, what kind of strength is this challenge inviting me to develop? Is it patience, clarity, self-compassion? Maybe it's the strength to rest, to ask for help, or to forgive yourself for not being perfect. At the end of the day, getting stronger isn't about becoming superhuman. It's about becoming more fully human, more aware, more intentional, more capable of holding both the beauty and the difficulty of life. And as you continue your journey, both in language learning and in life, I invite you to see every obstacle as a chance to grow stronger, not harder, not colder, but deeper. So, what's your definition of strength? And more importantly, how is it evolving? Micro-adversities, the everyday gym of growth. If strength is something we build, not something we're born with, then the next logical question is, where does that building happen? In what moments of our lives are we actually developing this so-called strength? The answer might surprise you, because more often than not, the growth doesn't happen during major life events. It doesn't come only from those dramatic, life-altering moments that we tend to associate with transformation. More often, it comes from what I like to call micro-adversities. The small, ordinary, frustrating, sometimes even ridiculous challenges that pop up in our daily routines. Now, I know what you're thinking. Can something like missing the bus, or having a tough conversation at work, or being criticized unfairly really help us grow? Isn't that just life being annoying? Well, yes, it is annoying, but it's also training. These tiny moments, if you look closely, are like emotional push-ups, and every time you go through one, you're building emotional muscle, even if you don't notice it at the time. Think about how a person trains at the gym. You don't lift the heaviest weight on day one, right? You start small. You repeat simple movements, consistently, and little by little, your capacity grows. The same applies to your inner world. Your patience, your adaptability, your self-control, they grow in the same way. Slowly, repeatedly, through real-life practice. Let's take an everyday example. Say you're in a rush in the morning. You spill your coffee, and just as you're about to leave, you realize you've forgotten your phone charger. You turn around, already stressed, and then you miss the bus. It's nothing dramatic, nothing life-threatening. But how do you respond? Do you immediately spiral into frustration? Do you blame yourself, or the world, or the bus driver? Or do you pause, breathe, and redirect? That small decision, in that seemingly trivial moment, is where strength is forged. What's happening here is subtle, but powerful. You're stretching your limits, not physically, but mentally and emotionally. You're expanding your capacity to stay calm under pressure, to tolerate discomfort, to shift perspective. And you're doing it not through theory, but through experience, through living it. These are the micro-adversities that life serves up on a daily basis. Not to torture us, but to shape us. They're like the background exercises of emotional resilience. You don't earn a certificate for dealing with a passive-aggressive email or navigating a cultural misunderstanding, but you do gain something more valuable: inner steadiness, adaptability, a thicker skin paired with a softer heart. What's also interesting is how these moments begin to stack. The more you lean into them, instead of avoiding or complaining, the more confident you become in your ability to handle what life throws at you. Over time, you start noticing a shift. You're not overreacting as much. You're rising to the occasion more often. You're handling complexity without shutting down or lashing out. And here's where the metaphor gets even more useful. In a real gym, you don't always feel the benefits right away. In fact, right after a hard workout, your muscles might feel sore. You might feel exhausted. But the next day, the next week, that's when you start to feel stronger. The same is true with emotional training. Sometimes those micro-adversities leave us tired or discouraged in the moment. But over time, they lead to growth, even if it's quiet and internal. It's also worth pointing out that you don't need to go looking for difficulty. Life will hand you enough small tests without your help. The goal isn't to chase suffering, it's to recognize challenge when it appears, and to meet it with intention instead of resistance. That shift in mindset, from "why is this happening to me?" to "what is this preparing me for?" can completely transform how we experience daily life. And let's not forget, not all micro-adversities are external. Sometimes, the hardest battles happen inside our own heads. That moment when self-doubt creeps in before a presentation. That wave of anxiety that shows up before sending an email in a second language. That internal voice whispering, "You're not ready. You're not good enough." These moments, too, are opportunities to practice, to breathe, to speak gently to yourself, to keep going, even when you feel uncertain. That's strength. So, if you're feeling overwhelmed by big goals or long-term ambitions, whether in your personal life, your career, or even your language learning, try this. Start noticing the small wins. The moments when you pause instead of reacting. When you ask a question instead of shutting down. When you try again after making a mistake. Those are your reps. That's your workout. And the beauty of this kind of training is that it never ends. It's not something you master and then move on from. You're always in the process of becoming, always refining, always growing. Every difficult moment, every awkward encounter, every frustrating delay is a chance to reinforce the habits and mindset that make you more grounded, more capable, more emotionally intelligent. So the next time life throws something minor, an inconvenience, an irritation, a brief moment of discomfort, try seeing it as part of your training. Because we don't become strong in theory, we become strong in practice. And you're practicing every day, even when you don't realize it. The inner voice, friend or foe? Let's pause for a moment and shift the spotlight inward, because up until now, we've been talking about the outer world, missed buses, awkward conversations, the kinds of challenges that are visible from the outside. But what about the ones that no one sees? What about the conversations happening inside your own head? Sometimes all day, every day. I'm talking about your inner voice, that constant stream of thoughts, evaluations, and self-commentary that shapes the way you interpret the world around you. Whether we realize it or not, this internal dialogue plays a massive role in how we experience our lives. It influences our confidence, our choices, our resilience, even our relationships. And yet, Most of us never stop to ask the question, is this voice helping me or holding me back? Now, let's be clear. Having an inner voice is completely normal. It's part of being human. We talk to ourselves all the time, often without noticing. We predict, we judge, we plan, we reflect. This kind of mental chatter is part of how we navigate complex situations. But, and here's the catch, just because the voice is familiar doesn't mean it's always right. In fact, sometimes it's flat-out misleading. You might already know this from experience. Imagine you're about to try something new, speaking English in front of a group, applying for a job, opening up to someone emotionally. What does your inner voice say in those moments? Does it encourage you gently, like a wise coach? Or does it flood your mind with doubts? Things like, "You're not ready," or "Don't mess this up," or "Who do you think you are to try this?" These kinds of thoughts often feel automatic, but they're far from harmless. Over time, they become mental habits, patterns of thinking that shape your identity and your behavior. Psychologists refer to them as cognitive distortions, biased ways of interpreting reality that aren't based on facts, but on fear. And the more we listen to them without questioning, the more they turn into limiting beliefs, quiet assumptions about who we are and what we're capable of. For example, a single mistake in the past can turn into a belief like, "I always mess things up." One rejection can create the thought, "People don't take me seriously." Before we know it, we're self-sabotaging, not because we're weak, but because we've internalized a voice that keeps us small. And perhaps the hardest part is we've gotten used to it. So used to it that we stop noticing how much it's holding us back. So the question becomes, how do we change the way we speak to ourselves? And the answer begins with awareness, because you can't change a pattern you don't even see. That's why mindfulness, and yes, even language learning, can be powerful tools for self-awareness. When you pay attention to your thoughts, especially in challenging moments, you begin to hear your inner voice more clearly. And once you can hear it, you can begin to challenge it. For instance, if your inner voice says, "You're not good at this," you might pause and ask, "Is that true? Or is it just fear talking?" If it says, "This will never work," you might respond, "Maybe not. But what if it does?" This kind of internal dialogue doesn't silence the inner voice. It engages with it. You're no longer just listening passively. You're becoming an active participant in your own mindset. Now, this takes practice. And let's be honest, it can feel uncomfortable at first. After all, some of us have been listening to the same critical voice for years. Shifting that tone takes time. But every time you interrupt a negative thought, every time you offer yourself a more balanced perspective, you're reshaping the way your brain responds to stress and challenge. You're retraining your mental patterns, just like you would retrain a physical reflex. And here's something powerful to consider. Your inner voice doesn't need to be perfect to be helpful. It doesn't have to shout motivational quotes or pretend that everything is fine. It just needs to be honest and compassionate. Think about how you'd speak to a close friend going through something difficult. Would you call them a failure? Would you say they're not good enough? Probably not. So why do we say those things to ourselves? Maybe it's time to reframe the question. Instead of asking, "Why am I so hard on myself?" try asking, "What would it feel like to become my own ally?" Not in a cheesy or superficial way, but in a grounded, realistic way. You can still hold yourself accountable. You can still have high standards, but you don't need to be your own worst enemy. So let's bring this back to where we started. Is your inner voice a friend or a foe? And more importantly, who taught it to speak that way? Sometimes the voice in your head isn't even yours. It's a leftover echo of a parent, a teacher, a social standard, or an outdated belief. The good news? You get to rewrite it. You get to practice speaking to yourself with more honesty, more kindness, more clarity. And the more you do that, the more powerful and peaceful your internal world becomes. Because true strength isn't just about pushing through adversity. It's also about changing the way you relate to yourself when things get hard. So the next time you hear that voice, the one that doubts, judges, criticizes, take a second. Don't believe everything it says. Question it. Talk back. And above all, remember, you are not your thoughts. You are the one listening. Resilience is learned, not inherited. By now, we've talked a lot about strength, what it looks like, how it shows up, and how it's shaped by our everyday experiences. But there's still a common belief that we haven't touched yet, and it's one that might be quietly holding people back. It's this idea that some people are just born strong, that resilience is a natural trait, something you either have or you don't. But let me offer a different perspective. Resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you build. It's not a personality trait. It's a process. And like any process, it's messy, unpredictable, and deeply human. Nobody comes into this world knowing how to bounce back from heartbreak, how to survive disappointment, or how to navigate personal loss. These are things we learn, usually the hard way. In fact, when you look closely at the people you admire most, the ones you describe as strong, grounded, wise, what you're really seeing is the result of experience, often difficult, painful, humbling experience. These people didn't wake up one day with unshakable resilience. They developed it, slowly, painfully, and often reluctantly, through the trials they'd had to face. Take someone like Nelson Mandela. When people talk about him today, they often focus on his strength, his dignity, his ability to forgive. But what's easy to forget is that those qualities weren't automatic. Mandela had spent 27 years in prison. 27 years. He had every reason to come out bitter, angry, or broken. But instead, he emerged with a deep clarity about peace and justice. He had learned to be strong, not by avoiding hardship, but by living through it and choosing to grow from it. Now, you don't need to be a historical figure to develop resilience. Sometimes, the most powerful examples are personal. Maybe you've met someone who hit rock bottom, someone who'd lost their job, gone through a painful breakup, or struggled with health issues, and yet came back stronger, calmer, more focused. The truth is, they hadn't always been that way. They had learned resilience over time. It hadn't happened overnight. They'd failed, doubted themselves, made mistakes, but they kept going, step by step. I remember a former student of mine, let's call her Anna. She was learning English in her mid-40s after moving to a new country. At the beginning, she had barely spoken in class. She'd believed she was too old to learn a new language. That's what she had told herself. But slowly, week after week, she kept showing up. She kept trying. And every time she made a mistake and chose not to give up, she was building something more than language fluency. She was building resilience. Looking back, Anna had told me something that really stuck with me. She said, "I thought I was the kind of person who gave up easily. But now I know. I just hadn't learned how to keep going yet." That shift in thinking, from identity to process, changes everything. She hadn't been weak. She just hadn't had the tools yet. But she developed them. And so can you. You see, the belief that we're either strong or we're not, that some people are just built differently, is not only false, It's dangerous because it suggests that we don't have agency, that if we weren't born tough, we're somehow doomed to fall apart when life gets difficult. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Every person you've ever seen bounce back from failure, overcome fear, or rise after falling, learned how to do that, often through failure itself. In fact, if you've ever thought to yourself, "I'm just not strong like that," it might be worth pausing to consider. Who told you that? And more importantly, have you ever given yourself the chance to learn? Because resilience isn't about pretending to be okay all the time. It's not about pushing through without feeling. It's about discovering, through repeated experience, that you can survive what you once thought would break you. And yes, learning resilience often means going through things we wouldn't have chosen. We don't usually get stronger in comfortable circumstances. We get stronger after we've been stretched, challenged, shaken. We get stronger by sitting with uncertainty, by standing back up after disappointment, by having to trust ourselves when we're scared and tired and not sure how the story will end. So if you're in a difficult season right now, if things feel heavy or overwhelming, maybe that's not a sign of failure. Maybe it's an invitation, a moment to begin learning resilience from the inside out. Because the truth is, no one escapes pain. But some people use it. They don't let the pain define them. They let it refine them. And that's something you can do too. Because resilience is not a genetic gift. It's a choice, a skill, a mindset. And the best part is, the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes. Not easier necessarily, but more familiar. And familiarity is often what gives us the courage to keep going. So maybe the real takeaway here is this. If you've struggled, if you've stumbled, if you've hit rock bottom and gotten back up, even just a little, you're already on the path. You've already started learning. And every time you rise again, even if it's messy, even if it's slow, you're proving to yourself that strength isn't something you're born with. It's something you earn. Strength in vulnerability. The power of breaking down. By now, we've explored many sides of strength. The kind that grows slowly. The kind that's shaped by experience. The kind that shows up in quiet moments. But there's still one piece that often goes unnoticed, misunderstood, or even rejected. And that's vulnerability. Somehow, many of us have absorbed the idea that being strong means being stoic. That if we want to be respected, admired, or trusted, we need to keep it together at all times. That crying, asking for help, admitting we're struggling, or needing rest are signs of weakness. But let's take a moment to question that. Because when you really stop and think about it, what could be more human and more courageous than allowing yourself to feel what you actually feel? You see, there's a kind of strength that comes not from holding it all in, but from letting it out, intentionally, honestly, without shame. It's the kind of strength that allows you to say, "I'm not okay right now," without believing that something's wrong with you. It's the strength that allows you to surrender, not in the sense of giving up, but in the deeper sense of releasing the pressure to be perfect, invulnerable, or emotionally bulletproof. Let's be clear. Vulnerability isn't weakness. In fact, it takes more courage to be emotionally open than to pretend everything is fine. Anyone can wear a mask, but to remove it, especially when you're scared or hurting, takes emotional intelligence, inner safety, and trust. When you're vulnerable, you're not saying, "I'm broken." You're saying, "I'm human, and I'm willing to show up fully, even if it's uncomfortable." One of the greatest misconceptions we carry is that breaking down means falling apart. But what if we reframed it? What if breaking down is actually a form of catharsis? A release that clears the way for something new? Just like a thunderstorm clears the air, a moment of raw emotion can open space for healing, reflection, and growth. Think about how many times you've held something in for too long, only to feel relief the moment you finally let yourself feel it. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. Of course, this isn't always easy. Most of us were raised, either culturally or socially, to associate vulnerability with shame. Maybe we heard things like, toughen up, or don't cry, or you're being too sensitive. And even though those messages might have seemed harmless at the time, they often taught us to disconnect from our emotions, to suppress them rather than explore them. But here's the problem. What we suppress doesn't disappear. It accumulates. And eventually, it spills out in other ways. Stress, anxiety, burnout, even physical illness. So when we talk about strength, maybe we need to include this: the ability to pause and feel, the ability to admit that we're exhausted, that we're grieving, that we don't have all the answers, because something powerful happens when we give ourselves permission to be vulnerable. We become more real, more grounded, more connected to ourselves and to others. In fact, one of the most powerful ways to build connection is by being open about our struggles. Think about it. When someone shares something raw or real, maybe a failure, a fear, or a moment of doubt, what do you feel? Most of the time, it's not judgment. It's empathy, respect, sometimes even relief, because it reminds you that you're not alone. Vulnerability creates bridges where there used to be walls. It's what makes us accessible, relatable, human. And no, this doesn't mean we need to open up to everyone, all the time. Vulnerability isn't about oversharing. It's about being honest in the right moments, with the right people. And, just as importantly, with ourselves. It's about recognizing when we've been holding things in for too long, and choosing, gently, to let go. Sometimes that looks like crying. Sometimes it looks like resting. Sometimes it means admitting, I need help. And there is real power in those words, because when we allow ourselves to break down, we create space for something else to rise up. New clarity, new compassion, new strength, not in spite of the breakdown, but because of it. It's often through our most vulnerable moments that we discover what really matters, who we really are, and how deeply we're capable of feeling. So maybe it's time to challenge the old narrative. Maybe it's time to stop pretending that strength looks like silence, tension, or isolation. Maybe true strength is softer, more flexible, more responsive. And maybe the bravest thing we can do, especially in a world that constantly tells us to stay strong, is to say, today, I'm allowing myself to feel. Because the truth is, even the strongest people have their breaking points. But they don't collapse. They break open. And from that place of openness, they begin again. Wiser, fuller, and even stronger than before. Conscious growth. From reaction to intention. There comes a point in most people's personal growth journey when they realize that simply surviving isn't enough. They're tired of just reacting, of being stuck in cycles they don't understand, of waking up each morning only to repeat the same thoughts, the same behaviors, the same patterns, without really knowing why. And that moment, however subtle, marks the beginning of a shift, a movement from reaction to intention, from passively enduring life to actively engaging with it. It's the moment we stop asking, "What's happening to me?" and begin to ask, "Who am I becoming?" This is the heart of conscious growth, not growth that just happens to us because time is passing or situations are changing, but growth that we choose. Growth that's rooted in awareness, in reflection, in the decision to live more deliberately. And once you start cultivating that awareness, everything begins to look different. You start to notice things, not just in the world around you, but in yourself. You begin asking questions like, why did I react that way in that conversation? Or, am I doing this because it aligns with my values? Or just because it's what I've always done? These questions aren't always comfortable, but they're powerful. Because to grow consciously means being willing to look beneath the surface of your habits, your decisions, your emotional triggers, and ask, is this still serving me? So many of us spend years, even decades, on autopilot. We go through routines, we follow cultural scripts, we carry inherited beliefs without ever examining where they came from. We're not necessarily unhappy, but we're not fully alive either. We react without thinking. We chase without knowing why. We respond with irritation, anxiety, or detachment, not because we're bad people, but because we've never learned to pause. And that's where the real shift happens, in the pause, in that tiny space between stimulus and response. That's the space where growth lives. Because when you begin choosing your response, instead of being driven by habit or emotion, you reclaim your power. You move from being a passenger in your life to becoming a participant. And that shift, as small as it may seem, can change everything. Let's say someone criticizes your work. On autopilot, maybe you get defensive, or shut down, or overthink it for days. But if you're practicing conscious growth, you might pause and ask, what's this reaction really about? Is it about what they said? Or is it about how I see myself? That one question creates space. And in that space, you can respond differently, with clarity, with intention, with integrity. Of course, living intentionally doesn't mean you always get it right. You'll still have emotional days. You'll still make mistakes. But even then, you learn to engage with those moments differently. Instead of judging yourself harshly, you get curious. Instead of avoiding the discomfort, you sit with it. You ask, what is this moment trying to teach me? That mindset, that gentle, honest inquiry, is the foundation of real growth. And this kind of growth is deeply personal. For one person, it might mean learning to speak up. For another, it might mean learning to slow down. For someone else, it might mean breaking a lifelong pattern, or finally creating space for joy, rest, or connection. Whatever your version looks like, it begins with paying attention, noticing your inner world, noticing what energizes you, what drains you, what lights you up, what shuts you down. So let me ask you, how much of your daily behavior is driven by conscious intention, and how much by habit? If no one were watching, what would you choose differently? If you could redesign one part of your life, your mornings, your friendships, your internal self-talk, where would you begin? These questions aren't meant to overwhelm you. They're meant to wake something up. Because even small changes, made consciously, can ripple into powerful transformations over time. Choosing to take a deep breath before responding. Choosing to rest before burning out. Choosing to listen when your instinct is to speak. These are small acts, but they are deeply intentional. And they are how we begin to shift our identity from someone who reacts to someone who responds with purpose. And the beauty of conscious growth is that it's never about perfection. It's about alignment, about slowly, gently bringing your actions into harmony with your values, and being willing to realign when you drift away. Because you will drift. That's part of being human. But when you're living with awareness, you'll feel it. You'll notice the misalignment, and you'll come back. So if you've been feeling stuck lately, or unsure of your direction, maybe the question isn't, "What should I do?" but, "Who am I becoming through this?" Because once you start living with intention, you're no longer just enduring life, you're shaping it. You get to choose who you become. As we come toward the end of this conversation, let's return to the heart of our theme. Life doesn't get easier. You get stronger. Over the past episodes, we've explored what it means to grow through struggle, to face ourselves with honesty, and to move from automatic patterns to conscious intention. But if there's one truth that ties everything together, one message that I hope stays with you long after this podcast ends, it's this: you get to choose who you become. Not everything in life is a choice, of course. We don't get to choose the families we're born into, the losses we experience, or the unexpected challenges that appear without warning. We don't get to control the economy, other people's opinions, or the timing of certain life events. And yet, within all of that uncertainty, there's something incredibly powerful we do get to control: how we respond, how we show up, what meaning we assign to what's happening, what version of ourselves we bring forward in difficult moments. That's where your agency lives, not in avoiding struggle, but in navigating it with intention. You may not have chosen your starting point, but you can absolutely shape your growth trajectory from here. You can decide, starting today, what kind of person you want to become, not just when things are going well, but when things are messy, uncertain, or uncomfortable. You might not always feel strong in the moment, and that's okay. Strength doesn't always feel like confidence. Sometimes it feels like simply getting out of bed when your thoughts are heavy. Sometimes it means pausing before reacting, or asking for help, or starting over. And yet, every one of those small choices is part of your transformation. Every one of those moments contributes to your evolving self-concept, the way you see yourself, and the story you tell about who you are. So let me ask you now, not as a test, but as an invitation: who are you becoming? Not just in the abstract, but in your everyday actions, thoughts, and responses. What values are shaping your decisions? What kind of presence are you bringing into your relationships, your work, your learning? These aren't questions you have to answer immediately. They're questions that unfold over time. But just by asking them, you begin to shift something inside. Because growth doesn't require perfection. It requires direction. And the beautiful thing is, you can choose that direction again and again. Even when you feel off track, even when you feel like you've taken a step backward, you are never stuck as long as you stay willing to reflect and realign. And that's the difference between a life that's lived by default and a life that's lived by design. When you believe you're stuck with who you've always been, you become passive. You resign yourself to old habits, outdated beliefs, and cycles that no longer serve you. But when you begin to see yourself as someone who's still becoming, the future opens up. Suddenly, your past no longer defines you. It informs you. And your struggles? They become part of your story, not the end of it. Here's something powerful to remember. You are not finished. You are still growing, still unfolding, still learning how to meet life with clarity and courage. And the person you're becoming, that future version of you, is being shaped right now, in real time, by your decisions, your mindset, and your willingness to keep showing up. Maybe you're in a season of growth that feels invisible. Maybe you're working hard behind the scenes, rebuilding yourself in quiet ways. If so, trust that this work matters deeply. Growth doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like setting boundaries, or letting go of comparison, or finally allowing yourself to rest without guilt. These are quiet victories, but they shape who you become just as much as the big moments do. So, going forward, whenever life feels chaotic or uncertain, pause and remind yourself, I still have a say in this. No matter what the world throws at you, you still have the power to choose your response, to stay grounded in your values, to treat yourself with respect, even when things don't go as planned, and maybe, just maybe, to become someone you're proud of. Not because you've avoided struggle, but because you've grown through it. So I'll leave you with this. Who do you want to become? Not someday, but starting today. What kind of thoughts do you want to plant? What kind of actions will support your values? What small choices can you make that reflect the person you're becoming? Because the future isn't waiting for a perfect version of you. It's unfolding right now. And you're the one shaping it. As we reach the end of today's episode, I want to take a moment to reflect on everything we've explored together. Life, as we've seen, is never meant to be a smooth, easy path. And that's not a flaw in the design of existence. It's a fundamental feature of it. The challenges we face are not obstacles to avoid, but rather the very elements that shape us, mold us, and ultimately make us stronger. We talked about strength in many forms, not just physical, but emotional and mental resilience, the quiet courage found in vulnerability, and the powerful shift from reacting automatically to growing intentionally. Remember the metaphor we started with, that life is not a gentle stroll in the park, but more like a rigorous gym for the soul. It's in the small, everyday struggles, those micro-adversities that might seem insignificant on their own. A missed train, a difficult conversation, a moment of self-doubt, where we're actually building what I like to call our emotional muscle. Just like the body needs resistance to grow stronger, our minds and hearts require challenges to stretch beyond their limits. And the beauty of this process is that it's ongoing, continuous. There's no final destination where strength suddenly appears. Instead, it's a journey, a gradual transformation that unfolds over time. One of the most important insights I hope you take away is that strength isn't about being unaffected or unbreakable. On the contrary, true strength often comes from allowing ourselves to break down, to be vulnerable, and to feel deeply, because it's through these experiences that we gain wisdom and emotional intelligence. We've also seen how resilience isn't something we're simply born with. It's something we learn, cultivate, and practice. And perhaps most importantly, you learned that you have agency, the power to choose how you respond to life's challenges, and by doing so, to shape who you become. Now, as you reflect on all these ideas, I want to invite you to engage not just with the concepts, but also with your own experience. Here's a little challenge, both personal and linguistic, to help deepen your connection with the episode and boost your expressive skills in English. Take some time to write about a moment when you surprised yourself with your own strength. Maybe it was a time when you thought you couldn't go on, but you found a way to keep moving forward. Maybe it was when you allowed yourself to be vulnerable, even though it felt risky. Or perhaps it was when you chose to respond differently than you usually would, with calmness instead of frustration, or courage instead of fear. As you write, try to describe not only the event itself, but also how that moment shaped you afterward. How did it change the way you see yourself? What did you learn about your inner resources? And importantly, how might that experience influence the way you approach future challenges? This exercise is about more than just language practice. It's about honoring your own growth and recognizing the strength you've already developed, often quietly and without fanfare. Writing it down helps solidify these insights, making them part of your self-concept and your ongoing growth trajectory. And here's a quick tip for your writing. Try to use some of the vocabulary and expressions from this episode. Words like resilience, vulnerability, agency, transformation, or phrases like rising to the occasion and breaking open to grow. This will not only improve your vocabulary, but also help you express complex emotional experiences more naturally and fluently. Before we close, I want to remind you that growth isn't a race. It's a process full of twists, turns, pauses, and leaps. It's okay to stumble or to rest. The important part is that you keep showing up for yourself, for your future, for the story you're writing every day. Because no matter how difficult life may feel at times, you are getting stronger. You are building the muscles of resilience, courage, and self-awareness that will carry you through whatever comes next. Thank you for spending this time with me here on Code Your English. I hope this episode has given you not only new language tools, but also meaningful reflections to carry with you. Remember, every challenge is an opportunity, and every step forward is a victory. Until next time, keep listening, keep growing, and keep choosing who you want to become.